Hey, good day. I'm Marty Walser, also known as Raging Owlbear on social media, and today we're going to talk a little bit about how to say yes to your players. Now, for a new GM, this may not seem like rocket science. Like I say yes to my players all the time. They ask me for something, I say yes. But what we're really talking about is giving the players a little bit more narrative authority or giving them some flexibility to do things that may be outside of the rules as written. If you've watched my videos before, which you probably haven't, but going back to my videos, a lot of the advice that I come up with is only because of things that I've done absolutely wrong in my game. And I realize later, wow, that was dumb. I shouldn't have done that, or I should have handled it a different way. Hindsight is 2020. Sometimes you look back on your sessions and you go, you know what, I did not do that right. And this is another good example. I've actually written about this topic several years back, and I always try to stay very open to my players' suggestions about things, about changes they want to make, things that come up in session. But even I get caught up in the moment, focusing on trying to be a good game master, a good dungeon master, um, and trying to run the game, and I don't hear what they're actually saying. And let me give you a perfect example that came up in a game very recently, actually. Um, so what happened is that in my game, the villains were trying to activate this device. I'm not gonna talk about what it is because I don't want to give any spoilers for my people who might be playing the same adventure. But the villains were trying to activate a device, and one of the things that was happening is that one of the bad guys was getting into this machinery, and my player asked, "Hey, I want to cast Black Tentacles," which in previous editions, Evard's Black Tentacles, which is tentacles rise up from the ground and they batter you around and do damage or grasp you or whatever. And so I was like, okay, well, not having read the spell in a while, I was like, oh, well, read the description and stuff like that. And it said, in the spell description, it said, tentacles rise up from the ground and grasp the person. Well, so I kind of got hung up on the rules as written. Um, the 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 foe that they were trying to affect was not on the ground. It was actually climbing up, kind of scaffolding, climbing into this machinery. And so I just kind of read the spell quickly, and I was like, well, it doesn't really apply here. It's not the spell as written, wouldn't have worked. And in hindsight, that was the wrong decision. I just said, no, it does. You can't really cast it. Doesn't work that way. And in hindsight, that was a bad decision. And what I realized is the player wasn't really saying, I want to cast Black Tentacles. I mean, that's what he was saying. But really, the subtext was, I want to do something cool to affect the plot, to affect the scene, to affect the encounter. I wanted to do, and what ended up happening is after I said no, that spell doesn't really. He's like, all right, fine. I cast my cantrip or whatever. 10 points of damage. But the point is that the the player was looking for a moment to do something cool and interesting and affect the bad guys getting into the machinery and starting it up and getting things running and whatnot. Um, and I was like, no, it doesn't work that way. And that was a big mistake. So what I realized only in sort of retrospect and hindsight, especially after my player had talked about, it, his character not working quite the way he thought it should and whatnot, had some discussion about that. Um, I realized, you know what, I kind of squashed his enthusiasm because he wanted to do something that wasn't exactly as the spell is written, but wanted to have some similar effect on the foe. Have him grasped, have him held, done damage, whatever. Um, and I just kind of overruled it simply because at the time I think I was like, well, if I allow him to do it this way, that makes that spell kind of overpowered, which in essence it would have been. But what I really should have thought of is that how can I say yes, allow him to maybe cast the spell, but just reinterpret the meaning of the spell or the exact. And and again, in the moment when I was dungeon mastering, I was I'm thinking about what are the enemies doing and what are the players doing, who's up next. You as a DM, you're kind of having to juggle a lot of stuff. So these moments are they can pass you by really quickly if you're not really focused on your players. And so part of my advice is to, when you do have to say no, or you think you have to say no, that, oh, no, you know what, the way the rule is written, it doesn't work that way. What you really need to consider in that moment is like, okay, how can I change that no into a no, but here's something you could do, or like turn it around so that the player still gets to do some action that allows them that sort of moment of awesome, because really that's what we dungeon masters are trying to do for our players, is give them the moment of awesome, give them that spotlight, you know uh, that perfect last ditch effort, that whatever, that heroic moment. And this was one of those things, is that he was clearly trying to stop a major foe from, activating one of the MacGuffin devices, the MacGuffin device. So, and in retrospect, I probably should have thought, well, yeah, the spell doesn't actually work that way, but maybe if you make an Arcana check and you overpower the spell, like maybe if you spend a fifth level spell slot instead of a fourth level spell slot, or think of ways that you could give the player what they want, but maybe at some slightly higher cost. In other words, you're bending the rule for them. You're like, look, this is not how the spell works, but your expertise tells you that maybe if you make an Arcana check, you can this one time, you can change the outcome, or the way that that spell works. And as example, Ever's tentacles, it grabs onto you. You have to make a dex save, and if you don't make the dex save, it starts to do damage, that sort of thing. Maybe because the tentacles weren't rooted in the ground, maybe it would be a strength check instead, or maybe they would have advantage, or but give them something, but not everything. Not because you don't want to obviously have this make a change to the rules that give them an overly powerful advantage on something. And then you say, this one time, and then like you say, maybe, hey, in your downtime, when your character has some time off, you can do further research on how you might modify the spell and make it do more what you think it should do. And so that gives them that gives them a bit of a campaign hook. It gives them, you know, it gives them that moment to use the spell as they want to use it, even though it bends the rules. It gives them a goal in the long term to say, hey, you know what? This one time, if you make that Arcana check, or if you do stuff like that, I will allow you this extra bonus to the spell. This is the change in the way it works. But you're not going to be able to cast it that way every time. You're going to have to do some research, and then we can create a new spell together. Your wizard can do that research to create a new spell, and then boom, now they have this fifth level spell. It's a little more powerful, or it has, or maybe it's still a fourth level spell, but you change. It does a little less damage. It's, in other words, it's increased flexibility, means that it's not quite as effective from a combat perspective, but it does other things. Whatever. The point being is that in the moment when I was doing that thing, I was just like, it doesn't work that way. Let's move on to the next thing. I got kind of caught up in trying to run the game and not hearing that my player was saying, hey, I'm looking for a moment. I'm looking for that little bit of spotlight on this action. Um, and that has happened to me before too. And, in a campaign I ran years ago, another example of my mistakes, my bad DMing, um, is again the characters were trying to stop an advanced sort of recon unit of this army. So they were they were playing D. We were playing D&D, but it was this fantasy. This army's coming, and there's a scout unit, and they're coming up the road, and they're going to do this thing. So one of my players said, "Hey, I want to do this thing," and when he described this sort of plan, and it was overly complicated and unlikely to work the way he envisioned it working, and it was the but the thing was is he was excited about this idea, and I basically said, well, that's not really going to work because of this, and this, or whatever. I kind of shot him down, and it was a bad deal on my part because you never just say, oh, that's a dumb idea. I mean, I didn't literally say it's a dumb idea, but you never say, oh, that just won't work. What you do is you're like, well, when you're thinking about it and you're talking with your compatriots or an NPC or what they suggest, um, you know, in order for it to work the way you think, we're going to have to do this. So you work with them, you give them like suggestions, you do a brainstorm with them as an NPC to say, um, hey, there's value to this idea, but there's also potential downfall. So let's work this a little bit. Basically, or on the other hand, alternatively, even if it's a little bit of an absurd idea, let them do it anyways. Like make the enemy dumb enough to fall for, or maybe not the whole enemy, but maybe make one or two of the bad guys dumb enough to fall for whatever ruse that person has come up with or whatever wacky plan. So you give them a little bit of like, it's not like, okay, I have this one trap that I set on this one little part of the road, and the whole unit's going to fall into that, and yeah, yay, we're going to stop the entire sky unit. No, I mean maybe you just like maybe one guy, they spread out and they're doing their scouting, and one guy falls for the trap or whatever, and then the other guys rush over to help them, and so you've given the player that opportunity to engage in their plan. So those are two bad examples that I had in my game. But again, I do listen to my players, and there have been some very good examples. And another one is I was playing a number of years ago Pathfinder with my nephews. I was teaching them D&D, Pathfinder, and whatnot. And we were playing a game where they were working a mystery, and there was a gargoyle, and they needed to catch this gargoyle to sort of get the clues that they needed for the next part of the mystery. And even if they didn't catch the gargoyle, there was other clues that were going to lead them there. But part of the thing was that they were going to catch this gargoyle. So they're in the city, the gargoyles, in an alleyway or whatever, attacking somebody. They come across the gargoyle, and the thief decides, hey, I want to go up to the roof to, get down from above. Now, Pathfinder is very tactical, it's very grid based. And, the movement up to the roof and whatnot, as you know, if you were to count squares, like 1, 2, 3, you're not going to make it. He doesn't have the movement required to do necessarily all the things he wanted to do in that one turn. But this character was the thief. I was like, you know what? He's a rogue. He has some second story, burglary style. He's a city rogue. He may know a thing or two about scampering up the side of the buildings, whatever. So I was like, okay, yeah, you might have to maybe you have to make a check to acrobatics or whatever to get up on the roof in one turn, something like that. Fine. So send them up to the roof, no problem. I wanted them to again have that opportunity to spotlight. So the other characters are trying to chase the gargoyle on the ground, and the gargoyle, and the other one guy's up on the roof, and then again the gargoyle starts to fly off. And my character on the roof, one of my nephews, is like, I'm gonna leap onto the back of the flying gargoyle to try to bring him to the ground. And I was like, that's a great idea. It's fantastic. But again, Pathfinder, grid based, the distance just wasn't quite there. His character was technically a little too far away. You know what? I was like, whatever, you're going to sprint and you're going to leap. Because I was in that mindset. I was in the proper mindset of saying, oh no, it's your character can only move 6 spaces, so you can't get there or whatever. I was like, you know what? This is the movement is kind of abstract anyway. Even if you're on a grid, it's an approximation of what everything looks like. It's not, the world isn't 5 foot squares. So I was like, yeah, what the hell, jump off the roof, get to the gargoyle. And so I said, absolutely do it. Roll an acrobatics check, and of course he rolled a one, and so he goes tumbling into the alley, head over heels, missed the gargoyle completely. But I gave the player that moment to that was his spotlight. That was his chance to grab onto the back of the thing and plummet it back down to the ground before it got away. And he failed miserably. But the funny thing is that created a really great story. So for the other players at the table, for him, it was funny. They loved it. Even though he failed spectacularly, and it was a lot of fun. And if I had been like, yeah, you can only move 6 squares, you can't get there, you know, that whole thing wouldn't have happened. You have to give them some of that narrative control, in some of the requests that they make to say, I'm going to make this change to the plot, to the rules, to whatever, to, give you the benefit of that idea you had. And so those are sort of the sort of in combat examples, but there are also like outside of combat examples in terms of when a player comes to you and says, "Hey, I want to do this thing, or my character wants to be this thing, but I want it to work this way." They want to make maybe some change, um, and again, you have to be a little careful because if they're trying to make a change to a class, they're trying to homebrew something, you know, you do have to be like, you stick to rules as written, but every once in a while, the ask might be small. I want to play a gnome, but can I be, +2 intelligence +1 dex instead of +2 dex +1 intelligence? So I just swap my modifiers. Yeah, why not? You know, I don't see the problem with that. As a matter of fact, they even on social media recently, this is a change that's going to come to D&D in an upcoming book, anyways. Just +2 +1, whatever. Change which one it goes into. There, this was not definitely not an official rule beforehand. It's not in the rules as written, but yeah, why not just sure make them allow them to swap that attribute? That attribute bonus, as long as it still follows that +2 +1 pattern that all the other you know humanoid races have. Who cares? What does it matter? Change 5% here, change 5% there. Um, or and that's a character based one. But there may be something in the lore, like uh, in again in my game recently, one of my players came up and said they were changing their character. They wanted to retire one character and do a new one because they just wanted to play something different and stuff like that. And this player is really into the role playing side and the lore and stuff like that. And I play kind of an open homebrew campaign that's some Nentir Vale and some Forgotten Realms and some Greyhawk, but it's really just kind of a hodgepodge of whatever I want to ideas I want to throw in there. And he's like, "Hey, I want my lore to be tied into the campaign story arc." And I had some ideas about this, and so we talked on the phone, and he said, "Hey, I want to do this, and I want to be, I want my, I want to be like a barbarian, or he wasn't actually a barbarian. He was going to be like more of a, can't think of the name, but it was kind of a knight class. No, actually, it was yeah something from Unearthed Arcana. It was a rune knight. It's like I want to do the rune knight, and I want to do this, and so he was talking about a lot of stuff that wasn't rules as written. It wasn't in the book. It was on our Unearthed Arcana stuff, some playtest material, stuff like that. And I said, well, let me read up on it. Let me think about it. And then he had lore ideas too. He said, oh, I want to tie my lore in with the giants and do this stuff. And I said, sure, yeah, absolutely. Well, let's talk about that. And I don't really have a set in stone kind of lore except for the stuff that's in the campaign I'm running, like in the published campaign, which I'm bending and twisting anyways. So we had the conversation. I looked at the Rune Knight from the Unearthed Arcana, and it seemed it's a pretty powerful class, but I was like, whatever. They needed a melee tank in the party, so I was like, sure, we'll do that. I may have to alter things in play once we start getting into play. If I see that there's something unbalanced, maybe we'll fix it, whatever. But the idea is I wasn't just like, no, I don't want to do this. This is gonna make things complicated, which it will. It'll make things a little bit more complicated, but because I have to kind of pay attention to the design of this sort of class that's only been lightly play tested. But the point is the player was asking again for some unique aspect or some moment that he could have a little bit more control over the game, a little bit more narrative. And absolutely, I want my players to buy into the lore, buy into the narrative, buy into the plot. So giving them little things where they can change things or make alterations, is a win-win because it makes the player happy, and they become a bit more invested in the campaign, which means they're gonna the other players, their excitement should spread to the other players. But the point is that you're making your players happy. That's kind of the goal of a good game master. Is your players, regardless of things are going well for them or going badly for them, they're enjoying themselves. So that's another example. There's a few other minor examples that I just want to touch upon, but you probably get the idea. But there are other games aside from D&D, that allow a little bit more narrative control, like our narrative authority. And you look at something like Fate or some other more story-oriented games that allow the players to change plot, change NPCs, do things within the mechanics of the rules to change the story within the game. Now, D&D doesn't really support this mechanically. D&D is about the players have their characters and they have their background and their story. But in terms of the larger adventure, the plot arcs, those types of things, that's really all in the dungeon master's hands. They control all the world. But there are things that you can give narrative control to your players by sort of allowing them to, add things to your game world, add canon to, your homebrew setting or whatnot. A perfect example is NPCs. They might have a patron or they have a friend or stuff like that, or even the party is coming into a new town, and they need to find some information, and one of the players says, hey, maybe my character knows somebody in this town. So they want to use some background aspect, or maybe they don't even have that background aspect. Maybe they have nothing mechanically that says, I know an NPC in this town. And so, you might be tempted at first to be like, yeah, you know what, you've never been here. How would you know somebody? But let's say, for instance, you want to give them that little, tidbit. It's a good way to drop some lore on them or drop clues, give them a contact in the town. If they're like, hey, I know a guy, you're like, yeah, okay, maybe you do, what's his name? What does he do? And go ahead and let them build that NPC. Or if you already have an NPC and they're like, hey, I know a guy, you could be like, all right, how about this guy? He's a so-and-so in town. Maybe you knew him back from when you were living in town X over here. But basically, you're giving that character, that player, a piece of the lore that you're creating. You're basically saying, here's this NPC. He's your NPC in a way. I mean, he's not. The NPC still it has its own motivations, its own personalities. But you're basically allowing the character to be invested by saying, hey, I have a friend. I have an old friend who moved to this town, and it's been years since I've seen him, but I'm going to try to look him up. Or, alternatively, the cleric comes into town and says, maybe I know somebody in the clerical order, and again, they're using some background aspect, some class aspect, or some background to say, hey, because I belong to this church, I need to get help from the church. And again, if they're tricking something from their acolyte background, absolutely give it to them. It's part of the background. It's a mechanical thing. But again, sometimes the player asks for something that they don't actually have. They don't have that background that says I have a contact. They don't have whatever. But you know what? Let them have it anyways, because you can use that to your own benefit as the game master. You've given them a contact. You can drop clues using that person. You can twist the NPC maybe a little bit, not necessarily to make them a betrayer, so to speak. They're not going to be a turncoat, because then your players will be like, well, man, I'm never going to trust anybody that you put us in contact with. No, but that NPC is going to have their own motivations. They're going to have their own agenda, and maybe it doesn't always follow exactly the party's agenda. And it's not that they say he's an enemy of the party, but maybe he has his own, again, motives. And so when the party reaches out to contact him, he's like, hey, you know what? It might be good for me to have these guys as contacts for me. Maybe they give me some clout. Um, the point being, you've now given the player something that they can be invested in your game world. There are even, and then there's smaller stuff. Again, there's always those combat oriented scenes. You're in an alleyway, you're facing off against some guys. One of the players says, hey, is there a fire escape? Now, maybe in this alleyway you didn't think there's a fire escape. But maybe if you're playing in a modern setting, maybe be likely there would be a fire escape. Or maybe you're not playing in a modern setting. There's not going to be a fire escape in a medieval town, but perhaps there's lean-tos built on houses, stuff piled up. There's some other way that a clever character might scramble up to a higher point, up to the rooftop or up to a balcony or something along those lines. If they say, hey, is there a fire escape? Say yes. Don't even think about it. Just be like, yeah, you know what? There is something that you can maybe scramble up. Because the thing is, you don't have to give it to them for free, in the sense that you don't have to give them everything they ask for, because maybe that fire escape is halfway between the, the party and the foes. So now there's a mad dash to see who can claim higher ground. Or, but the point being, you can give them things that they want, but at a cost, not or at some effort, make it a little more challenging for them to get exactly what they're looking for. But the whole idea is that if they suggest an idea to you, if they say, hey, is there a fire escape? That means they've already got a plan in their head. They're already invested in the scene. And if you say no, now all of a sudden they're like, I got to think of something else. The player sits back and is like, okay, that's not going to work. Now what? And so you have derailed all that momentum that they may have, because they're thinking of a plan. They're like, oh, my character's going to try to dash to that fire escape or try to rush up to the rooftop because they want to do this or that. When they have those kinds of ideas, you want to allow those ideas to flourish, because that's what gets your players excited about the game. That's what gets them invested in the scene. And it can open up other possibilities, again, create new NPCs, whatnot. And then, last but not least, there's also those little teeny tiny things that a player might ask for. I actually got into an argument online with somebody about this because it was such a silly example. But the party's coming into an ancient library, as an example, or a wizard's, laboratory, whatever. But the point is books on the shelf, some old, some new, whatever. And one of the players says, hey, is there a book on botany or some other random subject? Not something like, I'm looking for this ancient tome that has artifact magic in it, or a new spell book or whatever. Just, I'm looking for a random book on some subject. Yes, absolutely yes. There's no reason for you to say, there's no botany book in this library. Well, why not? Why not? Why not have this wizard be a gardener or have some varied interests in different subjects that they might have some specific subject type on the shelf? And not that it's a not that the character asks for a very specific book. Well, does they have Volo's Guide to Herblore, Volo's Guide to Herblore, or something like that? I don't want it. Whatever. The point being, it's a small ask. You're not. They're not asking for something that it's going to be game breaking. It honestly probably is just a little role playing aspect of their character that they want to put into the scene. They just want to do a little bit of role playing of like, oh, I will look for the botany books because I'm interested in gardening or rare herbs or whatever. Give it to them. Yes, absolutely, give it to them. Don't be like, well, this wizard probably wouldn't have a botany book in their laboratory. So, yeah. If you're doing that, man, sorry, I don't want to say you're playing the game wrong. I shouldn't say that kind of thing. But if the ask is small and it gets the character excited and invested in your game, then do it. That's what it boils down to. You want to create your player, give them that investment into the game, give them that extra little bit of fun, give them that moment in the spotlight. That is what game mastering is all about. So say yes, absolutely say yes. You know, now occasionally they're going to ask for game breaking things. That doesn't mean you can't say no to something game breaking. I want to be a scientist that has a million points and blah 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 blah. Sometimes you'll get the players that are just trying to game the system, so to speak. They're trying to min max. They're trying to do something, and and maybe it's obvious that they're just trying to whatever. It's okay to say no to those types of things. Like that could probably break the game. But again, you could instead of giving them exactly what they're asking for, ask why they're asking that question. What is it that you want to do with this character? What do you envision with this character that this thing that you're asking for would make better? Because if you get to the reasoning why they're asking the question, you may not need to give them something game breaking that will still give them that little bit of joy about their character. Um, so, even if they're asking for something a little bit off kilter, just ask, why? Just go to your friend. Hey, Jim, why are you asking about this? Did you have an idea? Is there something in your character concept that you wanted to move towards? Anyway, I've probably rambled on enough about this, but to summarize, your players are really just looking for that moment to shine. And whenever you say no to something, it could result in them either having to stop, lose their momentum, and rethink their plans, or be disappointed in some way, or just, man, this just isn't fun. It's frustrating. So it's okay to say no, but think about the why you're saying no and think about what they're really asking for. Because while they may be saying, I want to cast Everard's Black Tentacles, they may actually be really, the subtext behind that may be like, I want to do something cool that stops that guy or woman. But I want to do something that's cool. I want that moment in the spotlight. So do what you can to think about, okay, how can I give them what they're asking for without breaking the scene too much or whatever, without giving them something overpowered. That's pretty much it. Um, the point is, don't focus so much on rules as written. Be flexible, make a ruling, give them something that they can work with. And then you can always, if it was a mistake, you can always go back later and be like, hey, look, I let you do this thing. As it turns out, that spell is way too powerful if I allow it to be utilized in that manner. What's a good compromise we can come up with? Whatever. Point is you can always revisit rulings. If you get it wrong, it's not a problem. Just talk to your players a couple sessions later. Be like, oh hey, remember that decision we did a couple weeks ago? Well, yeah, we're not going to do that anymore because I realized it's overpowered or whatever. It breaks the plot. It does this. The point is that you can always change your rulings later. You let that thing stand. You're like, hey, how I ruled in that session is how I ruled. So that story has been written on paper. It's that has been actualized. But going forward, maybe we'll play it like this, and then you tell them what your ruling change would be. Um, Again, I've gone on too long. Say yes to your players. Give them that moment in the sun. You know, it's as a new game master, it can be a little bit anxious to interpret the rules not as they're written because you don't want to obviously do something wrong. You know, as a new game master, new dungeon master, but be flexible. Don't worry about improving something. You can always change your mind later. Everybody does it. And even like I said, this advice comes from years and years of me making mistakes and saying, "Hey, look for those moments so that you don't make those same mistakes that I've made over the years." And maybe that'll help improve your game. I hope so. Anyways, I've been Marty Walser, also known as Raging Owlbear on social media. So look for me on Twitter and whatnot, and right here on YouTube. Please like and subscribe so I can get a little bit more clout, maybe get a little bit of visibility. Because I know 5 of you have been holding up my channel on your shoulders. We need a couple more people. Anyway, I hope you have a good day, and we'll talk again soon.